In the bustling corridors of Maplewood Elementary, the scent of fresh chalk and newly sharpened pencils filled the air. The school was alive with laughter, chatter, and the occasional scuffle of sneakers on polished floors. Each classroom held its unique story, and among them was Room 5A, where Miss Mitchell began her day with an enthusiastic smile and the words, "I love you all." Her cheerful demeanor seemed genuine to most of her students, but deep down, a particular boy in the corner of the room doubted her sincerity. Miss Mitchell was a respected fifth-grade teacher with years of experience, known for her dedication and enthusiasm. Yet, even the best of educators could falter, and her personal flaw was her inability to connect with students who didn't meet her expectations. Henry, a quiet and often disheveled boy, was a puzzle she had no desire to solve. His clothes were always unkempt, his shoes scuffed, and his collar stained. While other children eagerly raised their hands in class, Henry sat silently, staring out the window as though lost in another world. Henry's presence unsettled Miss Mitchell. She saw him as a reflection of indifference, a student who didn't try and wouldn't succeed. She would often find herself correcting him more harshly than others, her patience wearing thin with every careless mistake he made. Despite her bright words at the start of every day, she felt a growing sense of frustration whenever her eyes landed on him. Beneath her frustration, however, lay an untapped well of empathy she had yet to discover. Henry's silence and disengagement were not signs of defiance, but of a quiet battle he was fighting alone. The other students avoided him, whispering about his odd behavior, and Miss Mitchell's lack of warmth only deepened his isolation. But the classroom's bustling rhythm left little room for reflection, and Miss Mitchell continued her days, unaware of the opportunity for change that lay before her. The turning point came unexpectedly. Midway through the academic year, as grades began to plummet, Miss Mitchell penned a harsh report about Henry's lack of effort and sent it to the headmaster for review. To her surprise, the headmaster returned the report with a gentle but firm suggestion: find something good to say about Henry. Every child deserves that. This small request set in motion a series of events that would challenge Miss Mitchell's perceptions and lead her down a path of profound personal growth. The seeds of transformation were planted, though Miss Mitchell did not yet know it. Her journey would begin not with Henry's behavior, but with her own willingness to look beyond it. The world of Room 5A was about to change, and with it, the lives of a teacher and a student forever intertwined. The day after receiving the headmaster's note, Miss Mitchell sat at her desk, staring at the worn pages of Henry's past academic records. She hadn't expected to feel anything, but as she flipped through the reports, something inside her shifted. Henry hadn't always been this way. His third-grade report spoke of a bright and intelligent child, a boy full of curiosity and promise. But by the fourth grade, the tone had changed. Henry has become less attentive in class. His mother's illness has affected him deeply. And then, in the final note, Henry's mother has passed away. We, as teachers, must work together to keep the light in his life from going out. Miss Mitchell put the papers down, her heart sinking. A wave of guilt washed over her as she recalled the countless times she had dismissed him, ignored his struggles, and even resented him. She had judged Henry without knowing his story. That morning, when she stepped into Room 5A and greeted the class with her usual words, "I love you all," her eyes landed on Henry. For the first time, she meant it. From that day forward, she made a conscious effort to include him. She stopped singling him out for mistakes and instead began acknowledging even his smallest efforts. She made sure to call on him in class, not to catch him off guard, but to encourage him. At first, Henry remained distant, skeptical of this sudden change. But slowly, something shifted. Miss Mitchell noticed small improvements. He started completing his assignments, even if they weren't perfect. He began making eye contact when she spoke to him. One day, when she handed back a test, he smiled for the first time. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Despite this progress, challenges remained. Henry was still struggling academically, and his self-esteem was fragile. Miss Mitchell knew she had to do more than just teach. She had to show him that he mattered. She decided to spend extra time with him after school, going over lessons patiently, encouraging him rather than reprimanding him. She found that Henry was incredibly bright. He just needed someone to believe in him. The more time she invested in him, the more he flourished. He began answering questions in class, his eyes no longer filled with doubt, but with determination. He even started helping other students with their work. Miss Mitchell wasn't just changing Henry, he was changing her. For the first time in years, she realized the true purpose of her role as a teacher. It wasn't just about academics, it was about shaping lives. As the final exams approached, Henry was no longer the same lost boy staring out the window. He was ready to prove himself. But neither he nor Miss Mitchell knew just how much that moment would mean. The final exam results were posted on the school board, and the students of Room 5A gathered excitedly, pointing at their names and celebrating their achievements. Miss Mitchell stood at a distance, her heart pounding as she searched for one name: Henry. Her breath caught when she saw it. At the very top of the list, Henry had not only passed, he had topped the class. A lump formed in her throat as she turned to look at him. Henry stood frozen in place, staring at his name as if he couldn't believe it himself. The other students looked at him with wide eyes, some even congratulating him. But Henry didn't move. Slowly, he turned his head toward Miss Mitchell, his eyes searching for something: approval, disbelief, maybe even pride. Miss Mitchell smiled, a real, heartfelt smile. For the first time, Henry smiled back. But the journey wasn't over. As the school year came to an end, it was time for the farewell ceremony. Each student brought gifts for their teachers as a token of appreciation. Wrapped boxes, colorful bags, and shiny ribbons filled Miss Mitchell's desk. And then, among them, was Henry's gift. It was unwrapped, unlike the others. The students giggled and whispered as he shyly placed it on her desk. A small bottle of perfume and a bracelet. The bottle was nearly half empty, the bracelet slightly worn. Miss Mitchell didn't hesitate. She picked up the bracelet, slipped it onto her wrist, and sprayed the perfume on herself. The familiar scent filled the room, but it meant nothing to anyone else. Only to Henry. As she leaned down to thank him, Henry's voice came out in a whisper. "Miss Mitchell, today you smell like my mother." Tears burned her eyes, but she held them back. She pulled Henry into a hug, holding onto him tightly. "I pray that you become a great and successful man," she whispered. "But never forget your adopted mother." That day, Miss Mitchell understood something profound. The impact of a teacher is far beyond books and lessons. She had not just taught Henry, she had saved him. And in doing so, he had changed her life just as much as she had changed his. But neither of them knew that their story was not over yet. Years later, Henry would return, and Miss Mitchell would realize just how deeply her kindness had shaped his future. Years passed, and Miss Mitchell had long retired from teaching. The walls of her home were lined with old photographs of students she had once taught, but one student always remained in her heart: Henry. She often thought about him, wondering where life had taken him, whether he had kept his promise to work hard and succeed. One day, as she sat by her window, an envelope arrived in the mail. She opened it with trembling hands and found a formal invitation. "Dr. Henry Richardson. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Dr. Henry Richardson." Tears blurred her vision as she stared at the enclosed plane ticket. Henry had not only succeeded, but had never forgotten her. When she arrived at the wedding, she felt out of place among the elegantly dressed guests. But as soon as she stepped inside, a familiar voice called out, "Miss Mitchell." She turned to see Henry, no longer a timid boy, but a confident young man. He rushed toward her and took her hands in his. "You came," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Miss Mitchell smiled. "Of course I came. How could I miss my son's wedding?" The entire room fell silent as Henry guided her toward the front, standing beside his bride. With a proud smile, he addressed the guests. "Everyone, I would like to introduce you to my mother. Not by birth, but by heart. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't be standing here today." A gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by thunderous applause. Miss Mitchell felt her heart swell with pride. She had never married, never had children of her own. But in that moment, she realized she had gained something even greater, a son. As she hugged Henry, tears streaming down her face, she whispered, "I told you to never forget your adopted mother." Henry smiled. "How could I ever forget the woman who saved my life?" And in that moment, Miss Mitchell knew that kindness, compassion, and love had the power to change lives, not just for a moment, but forever.